About 3 weeks after all of this started, I drove to a house I haven't lived in since I was 19. I sat outside for 20 minutes before I realized what I'd done. That's when I knew something was wrong. I'm not young anymore, mid-40s if that matters, and it probably does. I've been running the same record store on Admiral Place for 11 years. Grooves and Goods. It's a small place, narrow, with wood paneling I keep meaning to repaint, and a front window that fogs up every winter. I live alone. I say that not for sympathy, but because it means I had no one to check my thinking when things started going sideways. No one to say, "Hey, you seem off." I was already in a quiet kind of rut before any of this happened. Sleeping badly, eating whatever was easiest, spending most of my time in the shop even when it was closed. That's just context. That's who was holding the box when it arrived. The garage sale was at St. Matthias, about 4 miles from the shop. I go to those things because church basements and estate sales are where the real finds still live. Most of the vinyl you see at flea markets has been picked over before it hits the table. Church sales are different. The people running them usually don't know what they have. The box was in the back corner, under a folding table, shoved behind a milk crate full of Reader's Digest condensed books. It was a banker's box, the removable lid kind, sealed with packing tape that had gone yellow at the edges. Whoever taped it hadn't done a sloppy job. They'd wrapped it all the way around twice, horizontal and vertical. The box didn't rattle when I lifted it. I could feel the weight of records inside, maybe 40 or 50 of them, standing upright. I paid $8. The woman at the cash table barely looked at it. She said it had been in the donations bin when they'd opened that morning. Nobody knew where it came from. I brought it back to the shop and left it on the counter for 2 days before I opened it. That's not unusual for me. I like the anticipation. When I finally cut the tape, the smell came out first. Not mold, not rot, just age. Dry and warm and papery, the way old things smell when they've been sealed up, and the air inside has been the same air for a long time. The records were all 45s, each in its original sleeve. No label I recognized on most of them. Hand-stamped, a few of them. Some had no label at all, just a number written in ballpoint on the white center. I pulled the first one out. The sleeve said, "Side A, vocal, not for distribution." That's not especially rare. Acetates, test pressings, home recordings, they show up. I set it on the shop turntable, dropped the needle, and let it play. It was a woman's voice. No music at first, just her, close to the microphone, humming something low and untuneful before finding the melody. Then the words came in, simple words, something about a station, a platform, waiting for a train that kept not arriving. The recording quality was rough, but not primitive. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. Her voice was controlled, trained even. She knew what she was doing. The song was maybe 3 minutes. At the end, there was a long exhale, not musical, not performed, just breath, like she'd finished singing and forgotten to step back from the microphone. Then silence, then the needle found the center groove and began its loop. I played it 3 more times that afternoon. By the 4th time, I wasn't really listening for the music, I was listening for that breath. My first customer of the day came in around 2, a guy I'd seen before, 20s, usually browsed soul and funk. He stood in front of the 45 bins for a while, then stopped. He stood very still, hands loose at his sides, not looking at anything. After a minute, he walked to the door and left without buying anything and without saying anything. People do that. I didn't think much of it. That evening, I kept thinking about the woman's voice, not obsessively, more like trying to remember a word that won't come. I fell asleep early and dreamed about a train platform, which I noted when I woke up and then put aside as coincidence. Over the next week, I played the other records in the box. They were all the same singer, I was almost certain, though the recording quality varied. All of them had that same intimacy, that closeness to the mic, and all of them ended the same way, with that long, slow breath before silence. The behavior in the shop changed gradually enough that I almost didn't notice. Customers who came in and heard the music tended to stay longer. A woman I knew slightly, bought classical 78s, retired school teacher type, always composed, sat on the floor by the door for 20 minutes, and then said very calmly that she needed to call her sister. She hadn't spoken to her sister in 9 years. She didn't say that last part to me. She said it to herself on her way out, like she was narrating something. A teenager I didn't know came in on a Thursday and spent an hour going through the dollar bins. He didn't buy anything, but as he was leaving, he stopped and asked me if trains still ran to Muskogee. I said, I thought so. He nodded and left. The funk guy came back. He told me he'd gone to see his father, who he apparently hadn't seen in 3 years, and it had gone badly, and he wasn't sure why he'd gone. He said it matter-of-factly. He bought a James Brown 45 and left. I wasn't connecting any of this yet, but I'd stopped playing the box records when customers were in the shop. I can't explain exactly why, just a feeling. I started researching instead. The pressing, the label design, the handwriting. I put out feelers to collectors I knew, sent photos. One guy in Kansas City said the stamp looked like a small regional studio that had operated in northeastern Oklahoma in the late 60s before closing. So I drove back to St. Matthias on a weekday afternoon and asked around. It took 3 separate conversations before I found someone who knew anything. A man who helped with building maintenance remembered a woman who used to attend the church. Elderly, had moved in with family, had sent several boxes of things to the church before she died. That had been about 8 months ago. He didn't know her name, but 2 weeks later, through the church directory and a funeral notice in the Tulsa World Archives, I found her. The singer, I was almost certain it was her, had died at 81 in a hospice in Broken Arrow. The notice said she'd been a local performer in her earlier years, had sung at venues around the state in the late 60s, and had retired from music to raise a family. One of her daughters had a listed number. I called her. I introduced myself as a record dealer who had come across recordings I believed featured her mother's voice, and I asked if she could confirm whether her mother had recorded at a small studio in northeastern Oklahoma in the late 60s. There was a long pause. Then she said yes. They'd been done at a studio owned by a man who had promised to help her mother get signed, a promise that went nowhere. Her mother had never talked about them much. The daughter thought the tapes had been lost. I asked if her mother had suffered from any illness toward the end. Another pause. Longer. She said her mother had had emphysema, that she'd spent her last years on supplemental oxygen, that even so she'd sometimes tried to sing, quietly, when she thought no one could hear. I thanked her and said I'd be in touch about the records. I haven't called back yet. I keep telling myself I will once I figure out what exactly I'm handing her. The thing I can't stop thinking about is the breath, that exhalation at the end of every recording. I've played them enough now, alone in the shop after closing, that I can tell they're not all the same. Some are long, some short. Some sound tired. One, the last record in the box, the one with nothing written on it at all, ends with a breath that sounds less like finishing and more like trying to start another one and not quite making it. I haven't played that one for anyone. I don't plan to. I'm not certain what it would do to someone to hear it, and I'm not willing to find out. But I keep thinking about the teenager and the train to Muskogee, the woman calling her sister, the funk guy driving to see his father and not knowing why. All of them cycling back to something unfinished, something incomplete, like a song that ends before the resolution. And I think about the fact that I dreamed about a train platform after the first time I heard her voice, and that last month I drove past my parents' house. They sold it in 2009, it belongs to strangers now, and sat outside for almost 20 minutes before I realized I'd gone there without meaning to. I don't believe in anything supernatural. I think there are explanations for all of it. Music reaches something in people, something pre-verbal and unguarded, and a voice like hers, intimate, close, private, it gets past your usual filters. It makes you feel something before you can decide how you feel. That's what I tell myself. But I've been keeping the box in the back room now, under the counter, with a piece of tape back over the lid. Not because I think it does anything, just because I sleep better with it sealed. The last thing I'll say is this. When I spoke to the daughter before we hung up, she asked me one question. She asked if her mother's voice sounded... She paused here, choosing the word carefully. If it sounded like herself, like the person she was. I told her yes, it really did. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said her mother hadn't sounded that way at the end. She said her mother had spent 20 years knowing those recordings existed and not being able to find them. I've thought about that a lot since then, about what it means that the box was sealed, about who sealed it, and when, and whether they understood what they were putting inside. About whether the breath at the end of that last record is still waiting for something to follow it. I have been watching my wife more carefully than I used to. I don't think she's noticed. I'm not sure that's a good thing. I've been retired for going on 6 years now. 31 years teaching high school English in Amarillo, and when it ended, I didn't know what to do with my hands. My wife says I became a different kind of restless after. Not depressed exactly, just unmoored. I started going to estate sales on Saturday mornings because it gave me somewhere to be. Something to look at that wasn't the ceiling of our living room. That's how I ended up at the Dellinger house on a Saturday in late October. The Dellingers had been in that neighborhood since the 70s, raised kids there, and now the last one standing had moved to assisted living. The sale people had everything spread across the lawn and through the first floor. Lamps, kitchenware, boxes of Reader's Digest going back 40 years. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I never am. The yearbooks were in a cardboard box near the back of the garage, stacked under a folding card table someone had leaned against the wall. 8 or 9 of them, all from Tascosa High School, running from the mid-1970s through the mid-1980s. I went to Tascosa, graduated in 1978. I stood there for a moment just looking at them, and then I paid the woman running the sale $2 for the whole box and carried them to my car. I didn't look at them that day. The box sat in my study for almost 2 weeks. When I finally opened it, I was alone in the house. My wife was visiting her sister in Lubbock. I made coffee and set the box on the kitchen table and started going through them one at a time, just flipping pages. It's a strange thing looking at yearbooks from your own adolescence. Everyone's so young. Everyone's smiling in that particular way people smiled for school photos back then. Stiff, a little uncertain, like they'd been told to look natural and had no idea what that meant. I found myself in the 1978 book, which I expected. Junior portrait, senior portrait, a candid shot of me in the hallway near the gymnasium. I remembered the candid, vaguely. I didn't remember the other one. It was in the activities section, near the back. A group shot of the choir standing on the risers in the auditorium. I'm in the 3rd row, second from the left. The thing is, I was never in the choir. I took photography for my elective both junior and senior year. I have no memory of ever standing on those risers, no memory of rehearsals, no memory of being in any group photo for any musical program. But there I am, clearly me. Same haircut, same narrow face, same the slight underbite I had before I had it corrected at 22. I sat with that for a long time. My first instinct was that I'd simply forgotten. 35 years is a long time. But I knew even then that wasn't it. I'd been in photography. I remembered Mr. Acosta's darkroom, the smell of developing fluid, the red light. You don't forget 2 years of a class like that. And I would have remembered choir. I can't sing. I have never been able to carry a note. I showed the photo to my neighbor Dale the following week. He's a few years younger than me, mid-50s, never went to Tascosa himself, but he's lived in Amarillo his whole life. I wasn't sure why I was showing him. I think I just needed someone to confirm that I was in the picture, that I wasn't imagining it. He looked at it for a long time, and then he said, yes, that was definitely me. He asked where I'd gotten it. I told him the Dellinger house. He got quiet after that. He looked at the page again, at the caption. And then he started reading the caption aloud, just the names, monotone. Starting from the left, I assumed he was looking for someone he might recognize. But he kept going even after there was no reason to keep going, and he got through all the names in the first row, and then the second, and then he was into the third row. And I said, "Dale," and he didn't stop. He kept reading. His voice didn't change in pitch or speed. He just kept reading the names like a machine. I put my hand on his arm and said his name again, louder. He stopped mid-name. He blinked. He looked at me and said, "Sorry, I got distracted." He handed the book back, and we talked for another 10 minutes about something else entirely, and he seemed completely fine. But he didn't say anything after that about the photo. Nothing. Like it had never come up. I showed the photo to my wife when she got back from Lubbock. I was careful. I wanted to see what she'd do without prompting. She looked at it, confirmed it was me, asked the same questions I'd been asking myself. Why was I in the choir photo? Had I misremembered my electives? And then she turned back a few pages and started reading a different caption. It was a sports photo, football, and she read the caption in the same way Dale had, starting from the left, working right, getting through all the names in the same flat, unvarying tone. I took the book out of her hands. She looked up, startled. She said, "What?" I said I just wanted to show her the one photo. She said okay, and she asked if I was hungry, and that was the end of it. I started paying attention differently after that. Not obsessively, I wasn't keeping a log or anything like that. But I noticed the way the conversation dropped whenever the book came up. The way nobody retained the specific detail of what they'd seen, only that they'd seen something. My wife mentioned it again 3 days later and referred to it as that old football photo, which is not what it was. Dale, the next time I saw him, didn't bring it up at all. I put the book in a desk drawer and left it there for about 3 weeks. I didn't look at the rest of the box. In early December, I went to a Christmas concert at the Civic Center. Our Lady of Guadalupe's choir was performing. They do it every year, a big event. People come from all over that part of the city. My wife and I go most years. It's a good choir. Father Menendez has been building it for a long time. They sang 4 or 5 pieces without issue, and then, maybe halfway through the program, something changed. It was subtle at first. The blend shifted. The sound became less unified, not in terms of pitch, but in terms of character. The way a group of voices will sometimes fall out of phase with each other in a way that's hard to pinpoint, but unmistakable. I thought it was a technical issue, an acoustics problem in that part of the hall. But then I realized what I was hearing. The language had changed. I don't know what language it was. It wasn't Spanish. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't anything I could identify, and I had 31 years of reading and language coursework behind me, however modest. The melody was the same. I could still follow the line of "O come all ye faithful" underneath it, but the syllables coming out of their mouths were not the syllables of that song, not in any language I knew. My wife didn't notice, or she didn't say anything. The people around us didn't react. I sat very still and listened, and after another minute or two, it resolved back into Spanish, or seemed to. The ending of the song sounded normal, and the audience applauded. I didn't say anything to my wife on the drive home. I didn't know how to start. When we got inside, I went to my study and took the yearbook out of the drawer. I opened it to the choir photo and looked at myself standing in the 3rd row. 20 names in the caption, 20 faces on the risers. I counted the faces in the photo against the names in the caption and they matched, which is the kind of thing you check when you're looking for something wrong and can't find it. The thing I noticed, and I want to be clear that I don't know what this means, I'm not drawing a conclusion, was that I recognized several of the other faces in the photo. Not just vaguely, I could put names to some of them, and the names I could put to them matched the names in the caption. Kids I'd gone to school with, kids I remembered from the hallways in the cafeteria and study hall. Kids I had no reason to be standing next to on a set of choir risers. I called one of them, Tommy Reyes, who I'd tracked down on the internet a few years back. We'd kept loose touch, a birthday message every couple of years, that kind of thing. I asked him if he remembered being in choir, and he said yes, he'd been in choir junior and senior year. He had a good memory of it. He remembered the director, Mrs. Phelan, remembered the spring concert at the Municipal Auditorium. I asked him if he remembered me being in the choir with him. There was a pause, and then he started reciting. Not names this time. Something from the book, I think. A line from the school's mission statement, which was printed on the inside front cover of every Tascosa yearbook from that era. I know because I'd read it recently when I went back through the book. He recited it in full, all 3 sentences, in the same flat tone, and then he stopped. There was a silence on the line, maybe 4 seconds, and then he said, "Sorry, Bob, I got a little sidetracked. What were you saying?" I told him I'd forgotten what I was asking. He said no problem, and we hung up. I haven't opened the box again since then. The yearbook is still in the drawer. I'm not sure what I would be looking for at this point anyway. There's no version of this that resolves cleanly. Either I have a significant gap in my memory that 3 decades of living have simply smoothed over, which is possible. People forget, the mind edits things, trauma and time do strange work. Or the photo is wrong, mislabeled, misarranged, a production error from 1978 that no one ever corrected. Those are the options that make sense. Those are the ones I keep returning to. But I went to the Civic Center website last week and looked at the choir roster for Our Lady of Guadalupe. They list the members by voice part, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. There are 22 names on the current roster. I don't know why I counted. I don't know what I was expecting to find. What I found was that 3 of the names on that roster match names from the caption in the yearbook photo. Common names, some of them. Reyes, Callahan is one of them. I don't know if that means anything. Probably it doesn't. I just keep coming back to what I heard in the middle of that concert, the way the language shifted and then came back, like a station briefly losing its signal before the tower corrects. The way no one else seemed to hear it. The way my wife sat beside me completely still, watching the risers, her lips moving just slightly in the way they do when she's following a piece of music she knows well. Moving in perfect time, forming syllables I didn't recognize. I didn't say anything. I watched her, and after a moment she stopped, and the choir finished the song, and she turned to me and smiled in the dim light of the auditorium, and I smiled back. I have been thinking about that moment every day since. There's a thermostat sitting in a thrift store on Lyndale right now. Or there was. Someone bought it, or they didn't. I think about that more than I should. I'm 34, which feels older than it used to. I work part-time at a sandwich shop on Nicollet and spend the rest of my time doing what most people in my situation do, drifting. My lease ended in March, and I've been couch surfing since, which sounds more adventurous than it is. It's mostly just embarrassing. I started hitting thrift stores to fill the hours because they're warm and nobody expects anything from you. That's how I found the thermostat. It was a Saturday in late October, one of those Minneapolis days where the sky goes the color of old dishwater and the cold comes in sideways. I was in a place on Lyndale, the kind of store that smells like other people's attics. They had it on a shelf between a broken clock radio and a fondue set nobody wanted. A Honeywell round dial, the old kind with the mercury switch inside. Clean enough. Someone had stuck a handwritten label on the front, white masking tape, ballpoint pen, that said set to 68. I thought that was a funny thing to write on a thermostat, like a reminder or a warning. I paid $3 for it and didn't think about it much. I was staying at my friend Derek's place in South Minneapolis at the time. He travels for work and said I could use the apartment through November. It's a rental in an old duplex, drafty with baseboards that tick when they heat up. The existing thermostat was a cheap digital thing that kept resetting itself, so I pulled it off the wall, wired in the old Honeywell, and set it to 68. The apartment got warm. I went to bed. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not a bad smell exactly, more like particular, like cut grass and sunscreen and something charcoal adjacent. I woke up at around 2 in the morning and the smell was just there, sitting in the room. I figured it was coming from outside. I went back to sleep. In the morning, it was gone. I didn't touch the thermostat for a few days. It was holding at 68 and the place felt comfortable, so I left it alone. Then it got colder, properly cold, the first real cold of the season, and I nudged the dial up to 70. I want to be precise about what happened because I've spent a lot of time since then trying to figure out whether any of it could have a normal explanation, and some of it, I think, cannot. The temperature inside the apartment did not noticeably change when I moved the dial. What changed was the light. Not dramatically, it's not like the room transformed. It's more that the quality of the afternoon light shifted to something slightly different. Harder, somehow, more direct. And the sounds from outside changed. There were more cars, a different kind of traffic pattern. I stood at the window and the street looked the same, but it sounded like a busier version of itself. I put it down to the weather changing outside and the way sound travels differently in cold air. I made coffee and watched a movie and didn't think about it. That evening, there was a knock at the door. I opened it and there was a woman standing in the hall. Older, maybe late 60s, maybe 70. She was wearing a winter coat I can only describe as slightly wrong. The cut of it, the color. She looked at me with an expression I didn't know how to read. Not confused exactly, more like she'd been expecting someone else and was recalibrating. She said she was looking for Gerald. I told her this was Derek's apartment and I was just staying here. She looked past me into the room for a moment, then nodded and apologized for bothering me and left. I mentioned it to Derek over text. He said he didn't know anyone named Gerald. Previous tenant maybe, he said. It happens. I set the thermostat back to 68. The weird light feeling went away. The traffic sounds outside returned to normal, or what I'd come to think of as normal. I sat with that for a while and didn't touch the dial again for almost 2 weeks. Then I got cold. It was November by then, and the wind was coming in around the window frames. I turned it up to 72. The smell came back immediately. The summer smell, sunscreen and charcoal, and something sweeter underneath, like a candle that had just been blown out. And the light again, that hard quality, like a summer afternoon. I went to the window, and outside it looked like October. Leaves down, sky flat, but inside, the air felt like July. I want to be clear, the thermostat was not making it warmer in the room, not noticeably. The sensation was more psychological than physical, like the smell and the light were carrying a feeling of warmth rather than actual heat. I know how that sounds. I left it at 72 for 3 days. During those 3 days, 2 things happened. The first was the woman again. Different woman this time. Younger, my age, maybe a few years older. She knocked on the door on a Tuesday afternoon and asked if she could come in for a moment. She said she used to live there. She said she'd left some things. I asked her when she'd lived there. She said 2003. I asked her what kind of things. She thought about it. She said she wasn't sure anymore. She said it was more that she remembered leaving something and she paused, she'd been wanting to check. She was calm about this, no urgency. She talked like someone who'd been carrying a thought for a long time and had stopped being upset about it. I told her this was my friend's apartment and I was just staying here. She nodded. She said she figured. She apologized and left. The second thing, I found a photograph. It was tucked behind the radiator in the bedroom. Old photograph, printed on the kind of paper they used in the early 2000s, slightly glossy, slightly thick. It showed a backyard barbecue. People I didn't recognize. Someone was laughing, turned away from the camera. Someone else was looking directly at it with a flat, unsmiling expression. On the back, in the same ballpoint handwriting as the thermostat label, "Don't go past 72." I set the thermostat back to 68 that night. I didn't sleep well. I kept returning to the handwriting. The same pen, same hand, same deliberate block letters. Whoever had written the note on the thermostat had also written on the back of this photograph. which meant whoever owned the thermostat had also at some point been in this apartment. I texted Derek again. I asked him where the previous tenant had gone. He didn't know. The landlord had handled it. The guy had just stopped paying rent and cleared out. Derek had taken the apartment a few years later. I asked for the landlord's name. He gave it to me. I looked him up. He died in 2021. I told myself none of this added up to anything. Coincidences are not the same as patterns. I know that. I've had enough therapy to know that our brains are very good at finding connections that aren't there, especially when we're already anxious and unmoored, which I was. But I couldn't stop thinking about the note. Don't go past 72. What happens at 73, at 75, at 80? What year does 65 bring back, or 60? I turned the dial down to 65. I need to explain what I mean when I say the smell changed, because 65 was different from 72. At 72, it was summer. At 65, it was something else. The air went very still, the kind of stillness that belongs to cold places, to rooms where nobody has moved for a long time. There was a smell like something old, like the inside of a coat closet or a box stored since before I was born. The light went flat, not dim, just flat, directionless. I stood in the kitchen and listened, and the apartment was quiet in a way that felt like it was working at being quiet, not empty quiet, the other kind. I turned it back to 68 so fast I caught my hand on the dial and it took skin off my knuckle. Nothing happened after that. The apartment went back to normal. The baseboard ticking, a car outside, the upstairs neighbor walking around. I put the photograph in a drawer. I left the thermostat at 68. I moved out at the end of November. I didn't take the thermostat. I thought about it. I even took it off the wall, set it in a box, and then at the last minute went back and rewired it and left it there. Part of it was that I didn't want it. Part of it was something less rational, a feeling that it belonged there, that removing it would be the wrong kind of decision. I left the photograph in the drawer, too. The thing I keep returning to isn't the women who knocked, or the smells, or the quality of the light. I've built partial explanations for most of that. The thing I can't get past is the label itself. Someone wrote, "set to 68," and then donated the thermostat to a thrift store. They didn't throw it away. They put it somewhere it could be found and bought, which means they wanted it out of their hands but not destroyed. And they'd left instructions on it, as if whoever bought it would need to know. 68 is safe. Whatever 68 is, it's a setting that doesn't pull anything back, a neutral position, a year with nothing left in it. The person who owned that thermostat had spent enough time adjusting it, experimenting, or enduring to figure out where to leave it. And then they'd gotten rid of it, not carelessly, deliberately. I don't know what year 68 corresponds to. I don't know who lived in that apartment first, or what they were looking for when they turned the dial up, or how long it took them to realize they needed to stop. I don't know if the woman from 2003 ever found what she was missing. I've thought about the dial at 65, that flat light, that cold stillness. I've thought about what a blizzard year feels like from inside it, whether someone was waiting in that quiet. I live somewhere else now, different neighborhood, digital thermostat. But last week I was back in that area, cutting through on my way to somewhere, and I looked up at the duplex, second floor. The lights were on. I almost went up. I almost knocked and said, I don't know what I would have said. Check the thermostat. Leave it where it is. I kept walking. But I've been thinking about what it means that the label said set to 68 and not leave it alone or don't touch or any of the other things you'd write if you wanted someone to stay away from something. It said set it, present tense, active instruction. Like the person who wrote it assumed you'd already moved the dial. Like they knew that was what you would do. Like turning it was the only natural thing.